The wail of the air raid siren cut through the damp London evening, a sound that had become a grim lullaby for its residents. Eleanor clutched her worn shopping bag tighter, her knuckles white against the fabric. The sky, usually a muted grey, was now a canvas of urgent searchlights crisscrossing frantically, punctuated by the distant thud of anti-aircraft fire. Rain, a persistent drizzle throughout the day, began to fall harder, slicking the already grimy streets of Fulham. She hurried, her breath misting in the cold, towards the nearest public shelter. Every step was a prayer, a desperate hope to reach safety before the bombs descended. The shelter, a subterranean labyrinth beneath the bustling high street, was already filling. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool, fear, and stale tobacco. Eleanor squeezed into a small space between a family with 3 fretful children and an elderly woman clutching a worn Bible. The murmur of nervous conversations filled the void, punctuated by the rising crescendo of approaching planes. Then came the unmistakable, earth-shattering roar, followed by a violent tremor that shook the very foundations of the shelter. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. A young man, perhaps in his late 20s, stumbled past her, his face pale and streaked with soot. His uniform, that of a Royal Air Force pilot, was torn at the shoulder, and he winced as he tried to lean against the concrete wall. Eleanor, despite her own terror, felt a pang of sympathy. He looked utterly spent, his eyes distant and weary. As another, closer explosion rattled the shelter, a fresh wave of cold air swept through, making everyone shiver. Eleanor looked at the pilot again, noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way he hugged himself for warmth. Without a second thought, she unbuttoned her heavy wool coat, the one her mother had insisted she take, and offered it to him. "Here," she said, her voice a little shaky but firm. "You look frozen." He looked at her, surprised, his blue eyes clouded with exhaustion, but now holding a flicker of gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. He took the coat, its warmth a small comfort against the biting cold and the gnawing fear. They sat in silence then, 2 strangers sharing a moment of quiet resilience amidst the chaos, the rhythmic thud of bombs shaking their temporary sanctuary. Eleanor found a strange comfort in his presence, a shared understanding of the terror and the fragile hope that tomorrow would come. The all-clear siren, a long, drawn-out note of relief, finally sounded hours later. The shelter began to empty, people emerging into the pre-dawn gloom, their faces etched with weariness, but also a fragile sense of survival. Eleanor rose, feeling the stiffness in her limbs, and turned to the pilot. He was still wearing her coat, its familiar weight a comforting presence on his shoulders. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice softer now, no longer strained by the immediate threat. He nodded, a tired smile touching his lips. "Better now, thanks to you. That coat was a godsend." He started to unbutton it. "I'm Thomas Davies." "Eleanor," she replied, accepting her coat back. It felt strangely cold now that it had been warmed by another. "Eleanor Vance." "Eleanor," he repeated, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Thank you, Eleanor. Truly, I was on my way back to base after a long night. Got caught out when the raid started." His gaze drifted to the exit, where the first hints of grey light were appearing. "I should get going. My squadron will be wondering." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I don't have much to give you in return right now, but I'd like to repay your kindness." He pulled out a crumpled note, writing something on it quickly. "This is where I'm stationed, RAF Hendon. If you ever find yourself there, or if I can do anything for you, please don't hesitate." He pressed the note into her hand. His eyes, though still tired, held a genuine warmth. "Be safe, Eleanor." With a final, grateful nod, Thomas disappeared into the thinning crowd, leaving Eleanor standing there, the scent of smoke and damp earth in the air, and a small, hastily scrawled note clutched in her hand. She looked at the address, a distant place in North London, and wondered if their paths would ever cross again in this war-torn city. The memory of his exhausted but kind eyes stayed with her as she began the long walk home through the debris-strewn streets. The days that followed the raid settled into the grim routine of wartime London. Eleanor's job at the munitions factory was relentless, the clang of machinery and the smell of oil a constant backdrop to her life. Every morning she joined the stream of workers, their faces grim but determined. The city itself was a testament to resilience. Despite the gaping holes left by bombs, the crumbling buildings, and the ever-present dust, life stubbornly continued. Buses still ran, albeit on diverted routes, markets still opened, and people still found moments for laughter and camaraderie amidst the hardship. Eleanor's flat, a small two-room affair in a terraced house, felt a little more exposed after the recent raid. The windows, taped against shattering glass, seemed to offer little protection. Her neighbours, the elderly Mrs. Henderson and the perpetually cheerful postal worker Mr. Finch, were a constant source of comfort. They shared tea and rationed biscuits, discussing the latest news from the front and offering quiet support. The collective spirit of the community was palpable. Everyone was in this together. She often thought of Thomas, the pilot. His simple act of accepting her coat, his tired gratitude, had left an impression. The crumpled note with the RAF Hendon address remained tucked safely in her purse, a curious memento of a night of terror. She wondered if he was safe, if he was flying again, facing the enemy over the channel. The war felt so vast, so encompassing, yet moments like theirs felt intimately human. One afternoon, during her lunch break, Eleanor watched a squadron of Spitfires fly overhead, their engines a powerful roar against the grey sky. She imagined Thomas in one of them, a tiny speck against the vastness, fighting for their freedom. A wave of both fear and pride washed over her. She knew the risks they faced, the sacrifices they made. It solidified her own resolve, reminding her that every rivet she hammered, every bolt she tightened, contributed to their fight. The days were long, the nights often interrupted by sirens, but a quiet strength resonated through London, a collective refusal to be broken. Weeks turned into a month, and the memory of the air raid began to recede into the backdrop of daily life, replaced by new anxieties and new moments of quiet endurance. Eleanor continued her work at the factory, her hands growing calloused from the demanding labor. The rhythm of her days was predictable. Work, home, the occasional shared cup of tea with Mrs. Henderson. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor was on her way to work, navigating the busy streets near Victoria Station. The pavements were crowded with commuters, soldiers on leave, and women pushing prams. She was deep in thought, planning her day, when she heard a voice call out her name. "Eleanor!" "Eleanor Vance!" She stopped, turning, and her breath hitched. Standing a few feet away, looking less weary but still with that quiet intensity in his blue eyes, was Thomas. He was in his RAF uniform, neat and pressed, carrying a satchel. A genuine smile, wide and unreserved, lit up his face. "Thomas," she stammered, surprised. "What are you doing here?" He walked towards her, his smile widening. "On a short leave. I was actually heading to the station to catch a train north, but I needed to pick something up nearby." He gestured vaguely down the street. "And then I saw you. What are the chances? I've thought about you, wondered if you were all right after that night." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her. "I'm fine, thank you. Just going to work." She gestured towards the factory in the distance. "And you? Are you well?" "As well as can be," he replied, his gaze softening. "Still flying, still fighting, but seeing you, it's good. It reminds me of a little bit of calm in all the chaos." He hesitated, glancing at his watch. "My train isn't for another hour. Would you let me buy you a cup of tea? A proper one, not the watered-down stuff from the shelter." Eleanor laughed, a genuine light sound that felt rare these days. "I'd like that very much, Thomas. There's a small tea shop just around the corner." As they walked towards the tea shop, the bustling London streets suddenly felt less overwhelming. The scent of burnt sugar and chicory wafted from a nearby bakery, and for a moment the war seemed a little further away. In the shared space of a small, cramped tea shop over a cup of hot weak tea, a fragile connection began to bloom, a small beacon of human warmth amidst the vast, cold shadow of conflict. The tea shop was small and unassuming, a refuge from the constant rumble of wartime London. Its windows were still taped, but inside, the aroma of brewing tea and the quiet clink of teacups offered a momentary illusion of normalcy. Eleanor and Thomas sat opposite each other at a tiny, wobbly table. He looked less strained than that night in the shelter, his uniform crisp, his eyes brighter. They talked, tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. Thomas spoke of his family in Yorkshire, his pre-war life as an engineering student, and the strange, exhilarating terror of aerial combat. He didn't dwell on the horrors, but Eleanor could see the unspoken weight in his eyes when he mentioned lost comrades or particularly harrowing missions. He spoke of the camaraderie in his squadron, the bond forged in shared danger. Eleanor, in turn, shared glimpses of her life. Her parents, who lived in a small village outside London, her work at the munitions factory, and the daily grind of city life under the Blitz. She talked about Mrs. Henderson's resilience and Mr. Finch's unwavering cheerfulness. They found common ground in their shared experiences of the war, the quiet sacrifices, the constant underlying tension, and the small joys that kept them going. He listened intently, his gaze steady and kind. "You're incredibly strong, Eleanor," he said, surprising her. "Working in a factory, living through all this, it takes real courage." Eleanor felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "It's just what needs to be done, Thomas. Everyone is doing their bit." Their tea finished, Thomas checked his watch reluctantly. "My train. I really should go." He paused, a hopeful glint in his eyes. "Eleanor, would it be too much to ask for your address? Perhaps I could write. It's a bit lonely out there sometimes." Eleanor hesitated for only a second. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, there was a genuine sincerity about him, a quiet strength she found reassuring. "Yes," she said, pulling a pen from her bag and scribbling her address on a napkin. "I'd like that, Thomas. Very much." As they parted ways, the bustling station swallowing him up, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. The promise of a letter, a connection beyond the immediate chaos, felt like a small, precious gift. The city still hummed with the sounds of war, but a tiny flicker of hope had been lit within her. The first letter arrived a week later, nestled amongst bills and propaganda leaflets. Eleanor recognized Thomas's neat, economical handwriting immediately. Her heart beat a little faster as she tore open the envelope. His words were simple, describing a new squadron member, a particularly good meal in the mess hall, and the ever-present longing for clear skies and a proper night's sleep. He asked about her, about Mrs. Henderson, and if the factory was still as busy. Eleanor wrote back that evening, sitting by the weak glow of a single lamp, careful to conserve electricity. She told him about a funny incident with a misplaced wrench at the factory, about the queue for bread, and the latest news from the radio. She tried to paint a picture of her life that was honest, but also conveyed a sense of resilience, knowing he faced far greater dangers. Their correspondence became a lifeline. Letters arrived every few days, sometimes a week, depending on the vagaries of wartime mail. They were a tether, connecting two people whose lives were otherwise dictated by the relentless demands of a global conflict. Through their words, they built a quiet intimacy, sharing anxieties, small triumphs, and the mundane details that made up their fragmented lives. Thomas's letters were a window into the world of airmen, the constant tension of readiness, the brief, exhilarating moments of flight, and the crushing weight of loss. Eleanor's letters offered him a glimpse of home, of the steadfastness of Londoners, and the simple human warmth he sometimes desperately missed. Eleanor found herself looking forward to his letters with an eagerness that surprised her. They were a distraction from the dull ache of wartime existence, a reminder that human connection could thrive even in the harshest of circumstances. She began to see Thomas not just as the weary pilot from the shelter, but as a person with dreams, fears, and a quiet sense of humor that emerged through his words. The more they wrote, the more she felt a bond growing between them, a fragile but meaningful connection forged in the crucible of war. It was a cold, damp Saturday when Thomas's next leave came. He sent a telegram, a terse message announcing his arrival, and Eleanor met him at Victoria Station. The platform was a chaotic scene of reunions and farewells, but she spotted him instantly, his uniform a familiar sight. He looked leaner, perhaps a little more worn, but his smile was still the same. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm, a rich Yorkshire lilt that she now recognized from his letters. He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it, pulling her into a quick, awkward embrace. "Thomas," she replied, a genuine warmth spreading through her. "It's good to see you." They spent the day walking through London, a city both defiant and scarred. They visited St. Paul's Cathedral, its dome miraculously still standing amidst the surrounding rubble. They talked about everything and nothing, the rhythm of their conversation easy and natural. Thomas shared a harrowing story of a near miss during a dogfight, his eyes distant as he recounted the details, and Eleanor listened, her hand unconsciously gripping his arm. She then told him about a victory garden project at the factory, how the women were growing their own vegetables. Later, they found a quiet pub, its windows blacked out, and shared a pint of ale, savouring the simple pleasure of conversation and companionship. The pub, filled with the murmur of voices and the clinking of glasses, felt like a small island of peace in the storm. Thomas, usually reserved, opened up more, speaking of his hopes for peace, for a future beyond the war, a future where he could finish his engineering degree. "And you, Eleanor?" he asked, his gaze steady. "What do you hope for after all this?" Eleanor paused, thinking. "I hope for quiet," she confessed. "No more sirens, no more rationing, just quiet. And maybe," she added, a shy smile touching her lips, "to see my family more and to see you." Thomas's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The touch was brief, but it sent a spark through Eleanor. In that moment, surrounded by the muted sounds of wartime London, a profound understanding passed between them. It was a day of brief respite, a glimpse of what life might be like if the world weren't at war. It was a day that solidified their connection, deepening the quiet affection that had blossomed from a shared coat and a desperate night in a shelter. Remember, there's more of their story to come. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to follow Eleanor and Thomas's journey through the war. After Thomas's visit, the letters continued, but something had shifted. There was a new intimacy in their words, a gentle acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that had grown between them. Eleanor found herself reading his letters not just for news, but for the subtle hints of his affection, the shared hopes for the future that now felt more personal. However, the war was a cruel master of interruption. Weeks passed, and Thomas's letters became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Eleanor checked the postbox daily, her heart sinking with each empty delivery. The silence was deafening, far more terrifying than the wail of any siren. She knew the dangers he faced, the terrifying statistics of pilots lost in the skies over Europe. Every news report of a downed plane, every somber announcement on the radio sent a fresh wave of dread through her. Her work at the factory became a numb routine. The clanging of machinery seemed to mock her anxiety, each hammer blow echoing the desperate questions in her mind. Had he been shot down? Was he injured? Was he gone? She imagined the worst scenarios, the fear a constant bitter taste in her mouth. Mrs. Henderson noticed her subdued demeanor, offering kind words and extra cups of tea, but Eleanor found it hard to explain the specific ache in her heart for a man she had known for such a short, intense time. One evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Eleanor reread all of Thomas's letters, tracing his handwriting, searching for a clue, a hidden message of reassurance. She found only his usual updates, his quiet strength, and the increasing weariness that had marked his last words. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, and Eleanor felt the weight of absence pressing down on her, a constant reminder of the precariousness of life during wartime. The hope that had blossomed felt like it was withering under the harsh reality of separation and danger. Just as Eleanor was beginning to lose hope, just as the silence from Thomas had stretched into a torturous month, a small, official-looking envelope arrived. It wasn't in Thomas's familiar hand, but it bore the Royal Air Force insignia. Her hands trembled as she opened it, bracing herself for the worst. The letter inside was brief, formal, but brought an overwhelming wave of relief. Thomas Davies, it stated, had been involved in an incident over the English Channel. He was injured, but recovering, currently being treated at an RAF hospital in Lincolnshire. A visiting time was provided, with a strict note about the limited number of visitors allowed. Eleanor sank onto her small sofa, the paper still clutched in her hand, a mix of tears and laughter bubbling up. He was alive, injured, but alive. The fear that had gripped her for weeks began to recede, replaced by a surge of desperate hope and an urgent need to see him. The journey to Lincolnshire was long and arduous, involving multiple trains and a crowded bus. The English countryside, usually a soothing green, seemed blurred by her anxiety and anticipation. The hospital itself was a stark, functional building, filled with the hushed sounds of recovery and the scent of antiseptic. She found him in a ward, lying in a bed, his head bandaged, his arm in a sling. He looked pale and gaunt, but his eyes, when they met hers, held that familiar flicker of warmth and surprise. "Eleanor," he whispered, a weak but genuine smile touching his lips. "You came." Eleanor rushed to his bedside, her eyes welling up. "Of course I came, Thomas. I was so worried. Why didn't you write?" He gave a wry, pained smile. "Couldn't. Arm was a bit useless for a while. And the concussion. They kept me quiet." He paused, his gaze softening. "It's good to see your face. It's been a long time in here." She sat by his bed, holding his uninjured hand, the rough texture of his skin a comforting reality. They talked for hours, Eleanor relaying all the news from London, Thomas speaking of the accident, the harrowing moments, and the slow, frustrating process of recovery. The quiet connection that had formed between them, nurtured by letters, now solidified in the stark reality of a hospital ward, a testament to resilience and human connection. The hospital visits continued over the next few weeks as Thomas slowly recovered. Eleanor made the journey whenever she could, bringing him small comforts from London. A favourite brand of biscuits, a newspaper, a book. They talked about the future, not just the end of the war, but their own personal futures. Thomas spoke of returning to engineering, of building things, of a quiet life away from the roar of engines and the threat of bombs. Eleanor, listening, realized how deeply she wanted to be a part of that quiet future. One bright, crisp morning, a few days before Thomas was due to be discharged, Eleanor arrived at the hospital. He was sitting up, dressed in a fresh uniform, looking much stronger, though still a little pale. His arm was out of the sling, though he favoured it. He had arranged to meet her outside, away from the sterile confines of the ward. They walked slowly, arm in arm, towards the main gate of the barracks where the hospital was located. The sky was a brilliant, clear blue, a stark contrast to the usual London gloom, and the air was fresh and invigorating. Birds chirped in the trees, a sound of ordinary life that felt profoundly beautiful. As they approached the main entrance, a few other soldiers were milling about, some heading out, some coming in. Thomas stopped, turning to face Eleanor, his blue eyes serious but full of a deep, quiet resolve. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a little hoarse, perhaps from nerves, "these past few months, they've been unlike anything I could have imagined. That night in the shelter, you sharing your coat, it was more than just kindness. It was hope. And then the letters, and seeing you again, and now here." He took both of her hands in his grip firm. "I don't know what tomorrow brings, Eleanor. This war isn't over, but what I do know is that I don't want to face it, or the peace that comes after, without you. You've become everything." He took a deep breath, and his gaze was steady and unwavering. Then, right there, in front of the barracks, with soldiers walking by and the morning sun shining down, he asked, "Eleanor Vance, will you marry me?" Eleanor's eyes welled up. The chaos of the world seemed to fade, replaced by the simple, profound reality of his question. This man, who had emerged from the ashes of a bombing raid, who had fought in the skies, was offering her a future, a shared life, a future built not on grand promises, but on quiet resilience, shared understanding, and a love forged in the crucible of extraordinary times. "Yes, Thomas," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I will." And that brings us to the end of this captivating story. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Thomas's journey through wartime London, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and realistic human dramas. Your support helps us tell more stories like this.